To support our discussions with the world's leading thinkers, please see the video description or visit eism.eu/support. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of A Theory of Everything. My name is Luis Razo, the Executive Director of the European Institute of Science and Management and host of this channel. Today we have the extraordinary privilege of hosting a long-form discussion on the nature of time with two of the most widely respected thinkers in the realm of physics and philosophy, Professor Avshalom Elitzur and Professor Tim Maudlin. Gentlemen, thank you for the privilege. It's a huge honor to have both of you today.
Thanks for having us.
So let me start with a very brief introduction to both of you, and then I'll turn the floor over to the discussion. So Professor Avshalom Elitzur is an Israeli physicist and philosopher. He's a past guest of the channel, I'm happy to say. He's given us a couple of talks, one on the bomb testing experiment, for which he's famous, and another on biology, thermodynamics, and information. I highly recommend these talks to you. You'll find them on the channel. He's a professor at Chapman University. He's also the founder of the Israeli Institute for Advanced Research. His work focuses on the empirical aspects of physics, particularly in the quantum realm. He brilliantly integrates philosophical ideas and concepts into his approach to physics, and has a unique perspective on time as a fundamental aspect of quantum mechanics. We've talked a lot about this in the past, and I encourage you to watch our talks and to listen to some of his works. Very impressive. Professor Tim Maudlin, who's also very familiar to the channel, a past guest, in fact, a three-time past guest, and our most popular guest to date. He's come onto the channel to correct the 2022 Nobel Prize Committee regarding Bell's inequality. That was our most popular video to date. Then he gave us a presentation on a new theory he's building called discrete geometry, another fascinating, really important talk. And most recently, he came on to explain what makes a good theory of the world, which I suspect will have some relation to what we talk about today. So beyond that, he's a prominent professor of science and physics, professor at New York University. He specializes in the philosophy of space and time and the interpretation of quantum mechanics. He's a member of the International Academy of Philosophy of Sciences and the Foundational Questions Institute. And his work challenges conventional notions of time, emphasizing its philosophical implications. And as viewers of the channel will know, he's known for the clarity of his thought and his philosophical thinking and his influence in this regard. So I should, as a final note, let me add that Professor Maudlin is the founder of the John Bell Institute for the Foundations of Physics, which is currently looking for a home precisely to promote the kinds of discussions we're going to have today in a more formal, perhaps conducive to real scientific advance. If you like what you hear today, I encourage you to contribute to the Institute's fundraising efforts. I'll leave a link in the channel. If you happen to be in a position where we can talk about hosting the Institute, please get in touch with us. We're actively looking for a space for Professor and the Institute, which we think fills a very important need in philosophy and physics. So with that, allow me to turn the floor over to Tim. Tim is going to give an opening statement, and then Avshalom will follow up with a brief presentation, and then an open discussion. I will stay out of it for the most part and come back, hopefully at the end, to kind of wrap things up and to conclude. With that, Tim, please.
Okay, thanks so much. A very kind introduction. There's one thing you said, which I think is a little misleading, so I want to start there, which is you said, I have views of time that challenge the common conception of time. It's sort of the other way around. I'm more or less a defender of the common conception of time. I mean, I often used to say it's amazing. I actually get paid to go around giving talks arguing for the thesis that time passes, which, it would be a little hard to understand how that can even be the case, because it doesn't seem like a very controversial statement about time. It's oddly enough become one, and I think mostly for rather bad reasons and because of misunderstandings. And more or less what I'm going to do is give a presentation of what should strike people mostly as not a very surprising account of the nature of time. How that's going to relate to what then Avshalom's going to say, well, we'll see. So let me just say, I think there are two issues about time that I want to focus on. One is an asymmetry issue. That is there a fundamental, non-derivable from anything else, basic asymmetry in temporal structure, in the structure of time? And as an easy contrast, think about space. So the way we normally think about space, you would say, well, there are directions in space. We have a three-dimensional space. Let's just take the north-south direction here. But that there's no fundamental asymmetry. It's not as if space runs north to south as opposed to south to north in any sense, right? I mean, a line of latitude runs north-south, but it doesn't preferentially go one way rather than the other. So you have a geometrical structure there, but it doesn't have a fundamental asymmetry in it. On the other hand, what we think, and what I think is actually correct, is first of all, that time does have a fundamental asymmetry, that there's a before and after relation, and which is before and which is after of two events that are related by that is very important and very deep and plays a foundational role in everything we think about the world. As I say, most people have a very different reaction to the thought that they're gaining weight as opposed to the thought that they're losing weight. But the difference between those two things happening is just what comes earlier and what comes later, right? You have a weight at one time and a weight at another time. Whether you're gaining or losing weight depends upon which of those two times is earlier than the other one. So as now, there's been for some time, and sorry, that's the dog.
Oh, so you too have a dog. So
yes,
mine was barking earlier, so now it's here. Okay,
that's
good.
Milo. I hope he's going to stop. Anyway,
no worries.
The time issue, I think, has been very confused for quite a long period, because some people have said that if the laws of physics have a certain symmetry, which is usually called time reversal symmetry, then that somehow indicates that there really is no fundamental direction of time, that time itself has no particular asymmetry in it. If that were true, that would already be something you would conclude from Newtonian physics. This wouldn't be a new discovery. If the formal feature of time reversal invariance is clearly there in Newton's fundamental dynamical equations. Newton certainly didn't believe that time didn't have a direction. And all the people who understood Newtonian physics never claimed that time didn't have a direction and didn't worry about all of the various concepts like cause and effect and so on that seem to rely on time having a direction. So I think that particular line of argument was just always a mistake. So the first thing I want to say about time is I think time, unlike space, does involve a fundamental asymmetric structure, which we can think of as before and after. The second thing about the usual way of thinking about time, and this is certainly true of Newton, he says it quite directly, is an issue about what we can call global versus local. And here's what I mean by that. If you ask, what is it that's ordered in time? Newton would say, well, there are instants of time or moments of time, right? Instants of duration. And he further says, this is in a letter, he says a moment of time is a global kind of thing. He says one and the same moment exists on the Earth and on Mars and throughout the universe. So if I snap my fingers, okay, that's an event that happens both locally in time and space. But Newton thinks that the time part of it spreads out, and one and the same instant of time exists everywhere. And then it's succeeded by others, right? So the time structure for Newton is these universal moments of time that succeed each other. And you can order them from earlier to later, and you can talk about how much time passes between one and another. And so that's a kind of global aspect. And I think that's also part of our unreflecting, intuitive sense of time structure. Now, what relativity does is it gets rid of that second part. It provides us an account of the structure of space and time in which time no longer has that structure, which is commonly called absolute simultaneity, meaning that you could take events everywhere and say all of these happened at the same moment, then all of these happened at the same moment, then all of these. So we call that a foliation of space-time, and you can picture it in your head as a kind of slicing up of four-dimensional space-time into these successive layers or slices, each of which represents what happens at a moment. And then these are ordered. And in relativity, you don't have that. So when you get to special relativity to general relativity, there's a certain geometrical structure there. It doesn't have a preferred foliation. Instead, it has a light cone structure. It has some other structure that Newton doesn't have. And we could go into the details about that. But I don't think there's any reason to believe that Einstein didn't believe in a direction of time, either in formulating special or general relativity, in just the same way that, yeah, I mean, time goes on and there's a forward direction, and what clocks measure is this quantity called the proper time along their trajectory, but that also, you know, the clock would start at some moment and then tick forward in proper time, that proper time would have a direction. Certainly one can hold all of that even in relativity. You give up the global aspect, but you would retain the fundamental asymmetry of before and after, and of the idea that, I mean, for example, a star collapsing. So in general relativity, you'd often talk about how does it treat a star collapsing? But whether a star is collapsing or expanding depends on the direction of time, right? The time reverse of a collapsing star is an expanding star. And nobody thinks there isn't a difference between the two. That there's not a fact about whether a star is collapsing or expanding. So then the third thing to say, and I'm not sure if this will come up, is that whereas in special relativity and general relativity, you eliminate this preferred foliation and you don't need it for the purposes those theories were designed to produce, it looks like from quantum mechanical considerations, you need it back, or at least things go a whole lot easier if you have something like a preferred foliation. And this is because of the violations of locality that have been shown that follow from violations of Bell's inequality, from Bell's theorem. Because if everything were sort of relativistically causal, then it would be causally local in Bell's sense. And then these inequalities would kick in, and you'd say, in a locally causal theory, there are certain things you just can't see in a lab, you won't see in a lab. And we do see those things, right? We see actual numbers that violate this inequality. Certainly the easiest way to cleanly write down theories that will give you those violations is to put a preferred foliation back in. I'm motivated by that thought to think we should put it back in, and ways we could put it back in. That's much more controversial. But the idea to me, I don't think there should be any grounds to think that we're mistaken in believing there's a direction of time and that time just goes forward. And if you want from the notion of becoming, of course, becoming suggests a direction of time, because becoming means later something is what it wasn't before, right? That's, as I say, to become heavier, to become lighter involves a directionality. And I think that's always been there. It's always been in physics. It's been so obviously in physics that, and physicists represent it usually just by how they put in time coordinates, because there's a convention, and the convention says, as your time coordinates get larger, time is going forward, right? That's the forward direction of time. That's the way we usually count time, as I say, except when we're sending up rockets. When we send up rockets, we do the other thing. We do 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. And as the numbers get smaller, we go forward in time. But that's just a convention. It's just that the convention of putting the direction of higher time coordinates in the direction of the future is so embedded and so easy and so obvious. People do it without thinking, and they read off without thinking what's the future direction and what's the past direction. So then they can kind of miss that it's there, but it is there. It's certainly there in all their thinking. It's there in all kinds of explanations and so on. So maybe I'll stop there. What I've said that might become controversial, we'll have to see. Because I can't, aside from the idea of putting back in this foliation, I don't think anything I said ought to be very controversial.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Avshalom, the floor is yours.
First of all, Tim, I'm thrilled to be here with you again, because a few months ago we met in London and we had a public debate, but it was too short. We had the honor of sharing the stage with Michio Kaku and Jimena Canales, and it was wonderful, but we didn't have much time. And then we had an argument, which actually escalated in the positive sense, and I enjoyed it very much, and I believe that you did. But then the moderator said, that's it, and our time is, so we are run out of time. And then I always felt like the urge to have more lengthy discussion with you. So here, I take exception with a few things which I already did back then in September in London, and we are actually going to meet, I understand, again in Wales on May. So here is where I took exception with you, and later I can use the presentation to make it more visual. There is something very interesting about time. Time is passing, and you say that it's natural. And to the best of my knowledge, it is not that natural in the physical formalism. Luis, may I use now may I now share the presentation? How do
yes,
I
I think I already see the presentation, Avshalom. So it looks like you're sharing it now. Yeah.
Okay. Set up. So here it is, Tim. Let me point out what I think is for me is the most interesting problem about time. Here is something about time that the person in the street will share with us. And this is that things in time come and go, come and go. We had this guy, Alexander the Great, and then Napoleon, Genghis Khan, and then Napoleon. This guy came to the world, made wars and so on, then he died, and then the other guy, and then the other guy. Sorry for, my country is now, unfortunately, in a horrible war. So this is what comes to my mind. But events are coming into being one after another. This is what we know. So this is time. It's not so in space. I mean, now I'm in Israel and you're in the United States, and Luis is in Spain. Are you?
That's right. Yes.
Very good. So I can see only Israel and only the village in which I live. I wouldn't be so arrogant or stupid to say that the United States does not exist, that Tokyo does not exist, or other parts of the universe do not exist. They do exist, and they have exactly the same degree of existence, just like the place in which I am. It is only that I don't have information about them. They are not accessible to my perception. So this is time. In time, events come and go, come and go. And in space, events are there, locations are there, and all of them have the same degree of existence. So there is a difference. And then physics actually tells us, relativity theory, special and general relativity, that we should think about time as the fourth dimension added to the three spatial dimensions. And in this respect, all events along time have the same degree of existence. That is, Alexander the Great is long ago dead, and all those conquerors and villains, they are no more with us. But then it is only that they are not accessible to my perception. And that holds also for future events. I mean, for whoever comes in the future, for whatever happens to us in the future, we don't know about it. We think that it does not exist. And here comes the problem of free choice, whether we are free to choose our future. But then actually what physics is telling us is that we should think about past, present, and future as having the same degree of existence, just like different locations in space all over the universe have the same degree of existence. And I find it, I mean, this is the theory, this is the formalism, and it is so contrary to our common sense. So usually we know what would be the instructor's answer at university and college, or when we study science. Don't trust your intuition. Sometimes it is wrong. This is what the formalism tells you. Let me bring it to the extreme. And this is an example which I've used in our last debate. So here is an apparent paradox, which perhaps even you taught it in class. Let there be a spacecraft at a certain length, say 100 meters, and a tunnel at the same length. And according to special relativity, things which move closer to the speed of light are undergoing Lorentz contraction. That is, they become shorter. So here is our spacecraft moving apparently at the speed which is close to the speed of light. So it is much shorter than the tunnel, so much so that we can close the two doors at a certain time while it is there. Suppose that it is a tunnel for washing spacecrafts. So for a brief time, you can close it. This is what the person on the spacecraft tells the operator of the tunnel. However, this is special relativity, and because these are inertial motions, we can have another point of view, the point of view of the guy who actually driving the spacecraft, and he can claim that it is the tunnel that moves relatively to him, and it is the operator of the tunnel riding on her tunnel, and the tunnel is, as we can see, much shorter than the spacecraft, so much that there can't be any moment in which you can close the two doors. So here is an apparent contradiction between the two views. The two views are equally legitimate in special relativity. Each of the observers, Bob on the spacecraft, Alice on the tunnel, each of them can claim that they are at rest and it's the other party which is at motion. So it is you who have contracted, or it is you who have contracted. But here is a problem. If Alice has closed the two tunnels doors at the same time, she couldn't do it in the framework of Bob, who would claim that it is the tunnel which has contracted. So here is the apparent paradox. And how do we solve it? So we owe it to Minkowski and then to Einstein, who has adopted it. We can say that the two events, that is the head of the front part of the spacecraft emerging out of the tunnel and the rear entering, these are two events, and actually everything that happens at the two sides of the tunnel are events, and they are there objectively along space-time. It only depends, and here is how special relativity has begun, by making simultaneity relative. So from the viewpoint of, from one viewpoint, it is as you can see, from the viewpoint of the tunnel, it is the spacecraft which has become contracted. And from the viewpoint of the spacecraft, it is the tunnel which has contracted. In other words, Bob, who is riding the spacecraft, would tell Alice, we have agreed that you will close the two doors at the same time. You didn't do that. You first opened and closed one door and then the other door. You didn't follow our agreement. And she will say, yes, I did. This was simultaneous from my viewpoint. So, Tim, here is the problem. And I would like to ask you, do you, yeah, you're smiling just as you did in London. I think that there is a problem here.
So
Actually, what special relativity is telling you is that in order to make these slices, and you talked, and I think that you are going there about slicing the universe. But here are two ways of slicing the universe, and they are both equal. And in order for them to be equally legitimate, you have to accept that the universe all is there a long time, such that everybody can slice it in the way they want. But that means that actually there is no becoming. Time is not moving. Time is not passing. And I think that there is something very fundamentally missing in the present formalism of physics, special and general relativity, quantum mechanics. And we need a revision, a major revision, perhaps a revolution, in order to accommodate and in order for physics to be capable of dealing with this essential aspect of time.
Okay, so let me make some comments about this, because there's some logical moves that are made that I think can go under the radar a little. I completely agree with you when you say, again, let's just have this discussion within the ambit of relativity. At the end of the day, for other reasons, I'm worried about relativity, right? For reasons having to do with quantum mechanics, but let's leave those aside. You get to a point and you say, well, Alice's account of this and Bob's account of this are equally legitimate in relativity. And formally, that's correct, but I think that's correct because both of them are completely illegitimate in relativity, right? That is, I think the right way to think about relativity isn't it makes simultaneity relative, it eliminates absolute simultaneity. It just gets rid of it. It doesn't have any such concept. And so if you ask within the conceptual sphere of relativity, is the rocket shorter or longer than the tunnel when the two are in relative motion, which everybody agrees they're in relative motion? The correct answer is not, well, you can legitimately say the one and you can legitimately say the other. The answer is you can't legitimately ask that question because we don't have a quantity length that is objective between those two and can be compared to say which one is longer than the other. There's a kind of tacit, when you talk about the length of an object, there is a tacit reference to absolute simultaneity. You're assuming that, as it were, you could take a snapshot and freeze the object at a moment and then talk about distances between. And again, if you get rid of absolute simultaneity, then talk about the length of objects goes as well. There is no absolute length of either object. There is a set of events laid out in a four-dimensional space-time with a relativistic metrical structure to it that doesn't preference any of these foliations. And then if you, by one means or another, throw a foliation on, which really comes with putting on a coordinate system, then in terms of that coordinate systems, you can talk about things. But if you put on a different coordinate system, the talk will sound different and will actually sound contradictory. That's what you're pointing out. Of course, but the right response to that is say all of this coordinate-dependent talk isn't objective. It's anything objective, you don't have to mention coordinate systems. Now, I certainly agree that relativity says that the past is just as real as the present is just as real as the future. I mean, I don't think existence comes in degrees. I don't understand what it means to say one thing exists more than another. As the philosopher David Lewis said when he was talking about certain ethical considerations, he said, look, people in the Middle Ages who had cancer their suffering was just as real, just as existent, and just as worthy of consideration as people today who are suffering from cancer, and as people 20 years from now who will suffer from cancer. All of that suffering is as real can be, right? It's not like just because it's in the past, I can discount it, or just because it's in the future, I can discount it. So I agree that the picture is that the past, the present, and the future are equally real. I think that's true on any account. I think to say then a word you used and a word you have here is coexistence, that's very misleading, because normally in the English language, coexistence means existing at the same time. And no, the cancer sufferers in the Middle Ages do not coexist with me. And the ones that will be in pain 20 years from now do not coexist with me, because we don't exist at the same time, right? Certainly nothing in my past light cone coexists with me, and nothing in my future light cone coexists with me now. That we can understand relativistically without a problem. There's a little problem outside the light cone, but okay. But that doesn't affect us much in everyday life. So I think the word coexist suggests the absence of time, but that's not the right word to use. I don't think the past does coexist with me. I think it's as real, right? The past is as real as the present is as real as the future. But I don't think that if you then say they all coexist, then it seems to me you're raising puzzles about time that aren't warranted here.
I won't use the word coexist. I will say equally exist, but then the problem remains. Actually, what you do, Tim, by offering an objective view of time, actually you are killing time, or you are killing a certain aspect of time, which I think is the most salient and the most fundamental aspect of time, and this is its transience. So let me stress it. If, say, half an hour ago we were not talking yet, so there was this team, and then there was, let's go further, there was the younger team, the boy team, the baby team, and so on, and then the older team, and so on, just like me. To accept what you're saying is to say that each of our momentary selves is equally existing. I don't say coexisting, but they have exactly the same degree of existence. Now, come on, Tim. I mean, sorry.
My past, of course, I absolutely went to kindergarten, right? I mean, that's
Absolutely.
just a fact about the world. It's
Absolutely.
as much a fact about the world that I went to kindergarten.
Don't you think that there is something
I'm sitting in New York right now.
Don't you think that there is something very special, very unique, very mysterious about this moment in which you and I are now arguing? It has vanished already. Now it's a new moment, and it's a new moment. So there is something which abates us, and this is the now, the now which moves. I know that the moment I'll say that something moves in time, then you will ask me, what is the velocity of this motion in time? Do you need an extra time? And so on and so on. But at the moment, we do feel that time is passing. I mean,
I agree it's passing. I'm not denying that it's passing.
It is passing.
Its passage is that these moments are ordered by before and after.
That's fine.
Objective. That's absolutely objective.
That's fine. But actually what you are talking about, I mean, relativity talks about 4 dimensions, and you accept it. And you accept that our universe is 4-dimensional. So everything that we see here is just a section. Just as I show you a circle, and you will say it's a cylinder in 3 dimensions, and you see just a section of it. So every object that I'm holding, am I correct?
Okay, so here's something else I did want to say. I wanted to say before, and maybe the right thing is to say it now. You said something like, there's an issue of what we have access to, right? And then you said, well, the things that as it were, that are real are the things that are real now are the things we have access to. But that's not at all the case in terms of information. So again, you're standing there looking at the sky at night. You suddenly see a very bright light. And you say, my God, a star just exploded. And then anybody who thinks about it is going to say, no, it didn't. That star exploded millions and millions of years ago. That event that you are only now getting information about is a past event. Now, that must be right. Now, it's true that naively you kind of miss that, and if you until you have that extra little bit of thought, you might think, oh, the star just exploded right now. But kind of anybody thinking about it, understanding that it takes, there's got to be a process for the information to get to you, and that process is not instantaneous, is going to say, what I now have information about certainly isn't what's going on now. What I have information about of that sort is all stuff in the past, right? I mean, you agree with that, right?
So once again, we have to think in 4 dimensions. And in 4 dimensions, every object that we see here, which has 3 dimensions, actually it's a world line. With all the changes and where it is slanted, that means a certain kind of motion and so on. According to this, team is a zillion of personalities, of selves, each of them occupying its own moment. And there are zillions of Avshaloms, of which a few are fortunate to coincide, how should I say? Yeah, coincide with those selves of team as these moments in which we are talking. Tim, I don't believe any of this. It's absolute nonsense. We are talking, there is something unique to this very moment, which we think that it's unique. And physics tells us that it's not unique. It's just an illusion. And I always have the feeling that it is not an illusion. There is something about the future which is still open, which we can still affect it. We can still change it. You can change the past, right? Okay. This is what people tell you. Now, actually, you should say that you can't change the future, because whatever choice you're going to make is, in some sense, I shouldn't say already, because then you say that I'm making a linguistic blunder. But once again, your future self has the same degree of existence as the present self, which is now listening to me, and the past selves. And come on, I mean, okay. Don't you feel that there is some straitjacket here, that there is something very wrong in the way physics looks at?
No. And so again, now I'm going to complain about a different word you used, change. Okay. So let's just think about the logic of the word to change something, how we use that word. The only things that can be changed are things that actually persist through time, that exist at different times. And what we mean by saying that something changes, like gaining weight or losing weight, that's a change. That involves a comparison between the thing at 2 different times, right? And you say it's changed if it's different at one time than another. Can we change the past? No, of course not. Why? Because what happens, say, I mean, in all these science fiction movies where they say, well, what if we change the past and prevent, Hitler or whatever? You say that doesn't make any sense, because the past only happens once, and it doesn't persist through time, and it happened as it happened. And the future, again, I like to say there's a very deep philosophical principle that was enunciated by Doris Day. Que sera, sera, right? There was only one past, there will only be one future. You can't change an event for simple reasons. Like a single event only happens for a moment, it doesn't persist through time. So if I snap my fingers, that's not the kind of thing that can change or that can remain the same, because to remain the same means persisting through time. There is another question, which is nearby, which is, I think, the one you have in mind. Can we influence the past? Can we influence the future? But influence is a different word than change. Change means it was one way and became different. Influence means I had an effect on it. Now, I think causes precede their effects. I think the direction of time is absolutely central to the notion of causation. And because causes precede their effects, we can, by what I do now, I can influence the future, and I cannot possibly influence the past. I think that's right. That asymmetry arises from the asymmetry of before and after. So if you deny there's a fundamental before and after, say, asymmetry, then you're in a whole lot of trouble. And people who do deny it get into that trouble. But I don't deny it.
So, okay, I'm not denying it, but here it is. You're referring to the error of causation, which is actually rooted in the second law of thermodynamics, entropy increase and so on. What? When you snap your finger, then there is an event which is irreversible. There are sound waves which are spread and the effect, and you can't reverse it. This is what you mean. I mean,
that's not what I mean. Take a gas at equilibrium. Take a box of gas at equilibrium. Its entropy ain't going anywhere, right? It's reached this maximum entropy, it's going to stay there. Nonetheless, if two of those particles collide and bounce off each other, that collision causes them to go off in different directions. Has nothing to do with entropy. If the direction of cause, I mean, the entropy is connected to many different asymmetries, and I don't want to deny it has important things to do, but it's not the basis of the notion of causation. Otherwise, you would say in a box of gas at equilibrium, nothing causes anything, but nobody thinks that.
Okay, you're taking an isolated system where it's in complete equilibrium. But let's look at everyday life. Okay, I take a rock and throw at the window. The window breaks. You will never see the other way around. That is, right. Window breaking and a rock being pulled into it. Why is it? I think this is because of the law of the second law of thermodynamics. I can even show that. Okay.
The one is very, very much more unlikely than the other. But the time reverse one could happen, and if it did happen, the order of what caused what would also be different, right? If I throw a rock, or if I roll a ball across a carpet and by friction it comes to rest, then the friction of the carpet was the cause of the ball slowing down. The time reverse of that, which we'll never see, but is physically possible, then the carpet pushing on the ball would be the cause of it rolling faster, right?
Which never happens.
It never happens, and that's for reasons having to do with probability.
Which actually is what thermodynamics is based on.
I'm not denying that, but that doesn't say that causation is defined in terms of thermodynamics.
Okay, loosely, you would agree that they are somehow related. I mean, the reason why the carpet doesn't make a ball roll back and accelerate is because it's very unlikely. It's very unlikely that the cup of coffee will become heated. Yes. Okay, so this is the second law of thermodynamics, law of entropy. Yes.
But if it did happen, we all agree it's very unlikely to happen, right? We all agree, I take it, that it could happen. Very unlikely is not impossible. That's actually what the time reversal symmetry proves.
A few billions.
If it did happen, then also what counts as a cause and what counts as an effect would be reversed. In the first case, what were the causes would become the effects.
Very good. But now I'm returning to the relativistic picture of the universe. The universe is four-dimensional. So we have the 3 dimensions of space, and then we have the 4th dimension of time. And actually, every object that you see in 3 dimensions is just a section of the word line. So a word line of a person is just, we can't imagine such a thing because we can perceive things only in 3 dimensions, but it's a word line extending from their birth to their death and with all the things that they did in their lives. And nothing bothers you about the view that all those moments, I don't say coexist, have the same degree of existence. There is nothing unique to this moment in my life and your life in which we are talking, and they are just there at the same, they have the same degree of reality.
They again, yeah, my childhood has the same degree of reality as my sitting right here. It was just as real. I mean, you have a,
so the child,
let me ask another question. Let me ask just another question, because you said at one point, gosh, now on this picture, there's this time worm, and then there are these slices, and there are an infinite number of slices, and there are an infinite number of people, or something like that. I mean, you know, you've owned salamis, right? And I might go and say, look, right now, how many salamis do you have in your refrigerator? And you might answer quite reasonably, one. And then I say, but that's salami. Look, I could slice it this way and into an infinite number of salami slices, or I could slice it this way and into an infinite number of salami slices. Then I've got an infinite number of salamis. And you want to say, no, you don't. You still only have one salami. What's the deal? I mean, you're counting in a funny way. Infinite number of slices doesn't mean an infinite number of salamis, right?
Thank you. I'm very thankful for this analogy because I'm going to quote you on that. So we should think about the universe as a salami. It's one salami. Everybody can slice it according to their own reference frame. Let me offer you another thought experiment. You know, in theoretical physics and in philosophy of physics, we can sometimes go to extremes and think about a thought experiment that even if it's not possible technically, we can imagine it in some future technology. Perhaps I can freeze a person for a while. Perhaps I can make copies of that frozen person for a while, okay? So now I'm taking you when you're listening to Beethoven's Fifth, ta-da-da-tam, so, and you're enjoying it. And I should think about, you know, several teams a long time, each of them listening to a certain note within this fifth, okay, symphony. Each of these teams has memories for reasons that we mentioned earlier, the second law of thermodynamics, causation, and so on. But each team has the memories of the previous teams. So each of them has memories of the previous notes that the previous teams have heard. You just inherit the memories from one another. So actually, each of them is within its own moment, each of these selves, and together it's one team who enjoys Bach's Fifth, okay?
Well, now, wait, I'm not sure I understand. If you freeze me,
no, I'm not freezing. No,
I'm not enjoying anything. I'm not conscious, right?
No, I didn't freeze you yet. I didn't freeze you.
Okay, yeah,
so
okay.
It's just what happened. Now I suggest to freeze you, but then to make a few copies of you. So here it is. I'll make frozen copy of the first team. You agree that there are a few teams there. I'll make a frozen copy of the first team who is just listening to the first note. And then I'll make a copy of the next team, this next moment, who listens to the second note, and so on and so on and so on, until I have a line of such frozen teams. And now I put them in space. They're all frozen within the refrigerators. Right. One thing, another. I just made a copy of you. I promise that I'll later defrost you, and then there will be many teams, and there are going to be some ethical issues about that. But here is my question, Tim. Do you think that what I see now, this series of teams, is equivalent to the natural team enjoying?
No, absolutely not.
Tell me why not.
Space and not in time. Time and space are not the same in relativity.
Okay.
That's why there's a light cone. So a relativistic space is four-dimensional, but it's not the analog of a four-dimensional Euclidean space. I mean, one way to put it is this. Regular Euclidean space, say three-dimensional Euclidean space, you say it has 3 dimensions, but it's not because there are 3 special directions, this one, and that one, because you could take these 3 or these 3 or these 3 or these 3, any triple, right? That you can put 3 at right angles. The way and you know this perfectly well, the way a Lorentz signature metric works on a 4-dimensional manifold is that the time directions, the time-like directions, are fundamentally different than the space-like ones, and fundamentally different actually than the light-like ones. Those are geometrically different. It's not 4-dimensional in the way that you're just adding another spatial dimension to get a 4-dimensional Riemannian manifold when you put a Lorentzian metric on. So sure, a bunch of things spread out in space is absolutely not like a bunch of things spread out in time. Space is different from time. That's true even in relativity. Space-like directions are different than time-like directions.
You're presenting here the block universe viewpoint, which says
I don't even know what that means, but okay. But
so here it is. Here it is. Have we been able, just as a thought experiment, to look at the universe outside of space-time? All we will see is only world lines, no motions, nothing.
I don't know. Okay, I really don't know what that means. I'm outside of space-time. Am I in time anymore?
No, you're outside of space-time.
Then I can't see anything. Consciousness requires events happening.
No, at class, usually we teach relativity by the 4 dimensions by making a 2-dimensional plane and saying this is time. And then we show what it means, motion. Motion is just different angles of the world lines.
Well,
so I'm asking, I'm asking.
If you say that, you're confusing your students.
Why is that? This is what Einstein and Minkowski are
I mean,
doing.
they're going to say things
when
like,
you
what do you
show
mean
a
by the
Minkowski
angle?
diagram, when you show a space-time diagram or a Minkowski diagram, this is what you're doing. You're showing world lines within a certain frame. Okay, so actually you're showing their world lines, and you look at them, and there is no motion. Actually, what they tell you is that motion is just a geometry, the slanting of one world line relatively to the other. So there is no motion. And
no.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's not what you're doing is making a 2 or maybe 3 spatial dimensional picture representation of what's usually a 4-dimensional space-time structure, right? So you're doing a couple things. One thing you're doing is you're repressing one of the dimensions because you can't draw 3-dimensional, 3-dimensional pictures.
Absolutely legitimate.
But the other thing you're doing is you're using a spatial object to represent a spatiotemporal object.
This is what everybody is doing. I mean, this is the idea.
But then you just shouldn't be surprised. I mean, it's like saying, but are you telling me that space-time is made out of chalk? If your student said that, you'd say, no, you idiot. The representation is made out of chalk. Space-time isn't made out of chalk. This is a chalk representation of something that's not made out of chalk. This is a spatial representation of something that's not purely spatial. It's spatiotemporal.
Still, okay, not chalk, and there is not a blackboard. But still, this is what we do. I mean, we make space-time diagrams, and we say that actually they represent the real universe. And
they represent it, and you have to understand every representation has conventions. And in the convention, certain spatial directions are taken to represent temporal directions. And to understand what the diagram is indicating you, and also, usually the convention is up is forward in time, right? That's the usual convention. So if I drew a space-time diagram and I didn't indicate an up or a down on the diagram, and I said, is this a diagram of a collapsing star or of an expanding star? They'd look at you and say, I don't know, you haven't told me enough. You have to, every representation works by conventions, and you have to understand there are standard conventions for interpreting space-time diagrams. But once you interpret them, you'll see, yeah, this is representing things happening. This is representing a star collapsing. That's something that happens. It's an event that happens in time. It's not frozen. It's not fixed, right?
So once again, I'm trying to think about some future events in my life. What I'm going to do tomorrow, what you're going to do tomorrow. Perhaps I have something, I have a very tough decision to make, and I still don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow. You said that the child team is just as real as the present team to whom I'm talking, then the future team who will make that decision, and that decision is very tough. The decision is already there. You don't know about it, but it's
already. Stop saying already.
Sorry, I shouldn't say already.
I haven't made it yet.
Sorry. The decision is there in the 4-dimensional universe at the same.
Which is just a way to say it'll be there tomorrow.
Huh?
It's just a way to say that it'll be there tomorrow.
Sure. Okay.
You keep using the present tense in a misleading way here.
We have yesterday, today, and tomorrow. There is nothing special about today. Just as you said, there was. But yesterday is just as real as today, and tomorrow is just as real as today.
Right.
So here's a choice, a very tough choice that you have to make, and you will make it tomorrow. What you're actually saying, and I'm not using here anything temporal. You say that the
you did. You said I will make it tomorrow. That's correct. I will make it tomorrow. There are decisions I made yesterday. There may be decisions I'm making right now, and there are decisions I will make tomorrow. Those tenses, the past, present, and future linguistic tenses, indicate things that happened to the past, things that are happening simultaneously when I'm speaking, and things that will.
Here's the thing. Here's the problem that yesterday you said about today, it will be. tomorrow I will talk with Avshalom, and now I am talking, and tomorrow you will say I did talk with Avshalom. So there are three ways to refer to the same event, and actually you say that none of them is privileged, which is actually what everybody is saying. There is nothing privileged about today, about this day, about this moment in our life.
Yeah.
So that means that the decision that you don't know yet that you're going to make is just as real as every event in the universe to which you have no access.
It will be just as real, sure. Again, you used is there. It hasn't happened
Think about
yet.
Andromeda.
Is misleading.
Think about a moment in an event in Andromeda. And Andromeda is far away enough such that if I'm moving this way, that event has already happened some hundreds of years ago, even more.
No.
This is special relativity, Tim. When
but
you're
taking
Lorentz
you're taking coordinate systems too seriously there. That's true in certain Lorentz coordinate systems, okay? In general relativity, there are 0 Lorentz coordinate systems, so you can't even say.
Then it will be.
But even in special relativity, there are non-Lorentz coordinate systems. I can put in coordinates where, you know, the equal T surfaces look very different.
What is your simultaneity? Your simultaneity plane becomes slanted when you move.
But it's not real. It doesn't represent anything real in that.
Right. So here we come back to our tunnel. The moment the door was open and the moment the tunnel's door was shut, and then the moment the tunnel's door was open and then shut again, they have the same degree of existence. It just depends on your reference frame, which of the two doors, which of the two events with the doors are
happened before the other.
So they have the same degree of existence.
Yes.
Which
that's
means
just
that
to
in
say
our
that
lives
each
also,
door actually opened and shut. That's all that says, is that each door, as a matter of fact, as a physical fact, as real as each other, both opened and shut in sequence.
well,
Each door did that. Yes. Those were all real things that happened. Yes.
I confess that I feel that I have exhausted my capability of saying that there is something very sorely missing here. And this is that my feeling that every moment is new in time and is genuine and in some real sense, objective sense, is there in a way which makes it special, unique, that there is a now which moves and which creates events, and that the future does not exist but comes into existence. I'm trying to show that this is missing in the language of physics. And you either don't think that it's missing or don't think that it should be there.
I think it's absolutely not missing from the language of physics, as long as you actually do have a direction of time. If you got rid of a direction of time, then you would not have
I'm taking the direction of time.
Okay,
Here's a cup of coffee. Here is a cup of coffee, and this cup of coffee is becoming cooler and cooler.
Yes.
Now, you can say that here is a lukewarm cup of coffee, which becomes hotter and hotter because I'm reading time this way. And another guy will say,
you'd be making a mistake if you did that.
Why?
Because time has a direction. You'd be getting the direction wrong.
A few moments earlier, you said that if I look at the ball rolling on the carpet and then the ball being at rest and then beginning to accelerate by taking molecular motions from the carpet, it's possible. And it
is possible. It never actually happens, but it's possible. But and your coffee spontaneously going from lukewarm to divided between cold and very hot, that's physically possible. Never happens. If you thought it actually happened, you'd be making a mistake.
If they do exist, I mean, you say that there are two ways to read a history, from the beginning to the end and from the end to the beginning. And they're not,
I didn't say that.
The
right way, that's why I'm saying there's before and after. The right way to read the history is to start at the beginning and then go later and later and later. And I think there's an absolute direction of time. So there's a correct way to tell that story.
Yeah, there is an absolute
If you reverse before and after, you're making a mistake.
Okay, there is an absolute direction. Actually, I was thinking that you have the view of Hugh Price, who has this.
No.
Okay. So he's your adversary.
Absolutely not. No, I absolutely reject Hugh's view. I can't make sense of retrocausation. As I said, I think causes have to precede their effects. I think retrocausation is analytically impossible. And Hugh's view is that it's actual.
Okay.
No, we have absolutely, completely, totally different views.
Okay, now I see. So far we were talking about relativity, special. We should also mention general, but perhaps we will do it later. But then we agree that there is a quantum mechanical aspect also here,
Yes.
which, and then you would object when I will say that there is some retrocausation in quantum mechanics.
Right. I'll put in a foliation and say everything goes to the future with respect to that foliation.
Right.
There is now a preferred foliation. There's no retrocausation. Everything can be written as you would in, say, Bohmian mechanics. You solve the Schrödinger equation just going to the future. You solve the guidance equation just going to the future. Causes always precede their effects. There's no loops. There can't be.
So can I ask you something? I want to expand this debate. I need a few minutes to bring another presentation. Can we take a break of 5 minutes and then return?
Sure. Fine by me. There's been a gap in time that people might not realize between a second ago and the recording.
We needed
and now.
a break.
And in that time, I went and got Hugh Price's book just because I think this is a very, very common linguistic problem. It leads to a lot of confusion.
So you think the time has passed?
The particular linguistic question is, what does one mean by saying I believe in a block universe? Okay, because people will ask me, do you believe in a block universe? In a sense, I absolutely do, and in a sense, I absolutely don't. And the problem is that Hugh at least defined the view so that it has these two completely different components. So let me just read what he says. He says, this is on page 15. He says,
in the book Archimedes point, the book is on Archimedes point. And
yeah, this is Times Arrow on Archimedes point. Page 15.
Bestseller. It's a bestseller.
He says, from now on, I shall simply take for granted the main tenets of the block universe view. In particular, I'll assume that the present has no special objective status, instead being perspectival in the way that the notion of here is. And I'll take it for granted that there is no objective flow of time. These assumptions will operate mainly in a negative way. I shall not explore the suggestion that flow gives direction to time, for example, because I shall be taking for granted there is no such thing as flow. Now, so he puts together two theses. One is that the past, present, and future are all equally real. I believe that. The other is that there is no direction of time and no passage of time. I don't believe that at all. Okay, I absolutely reject that. So if you ask me, do I believe the block universe view, I have, it's very tricky because those two completely independent pieces have been put under this one name. And I accept one and absolutely reject the other.
What is the one that you accept?
I accept that the past, present, and future are all equally real, and that the word now operates linguistically like the word here, right? I mean, when I say it's snowing here, that means it's snowing at the location where I say the sentence, and it's true at this location. If you said the very same sentence, Avshalom, right now, and said it's snowing here, what you say would be false, because here is an indexical, it picks out where you happen to be. Now works like that too. Now picks out the time in which you happen to say something. And if you say
the same holds for yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I mean, just
yes, those what counts as yesterday, today, and tomorrow change depending upon when you use the words, because they have this indexical component, just like here is an indexical component. And no place is objectively here, right?
And no time is objectively now.
And no time is in some sense, because normally what we mean by objectively is something like independent of time or independent of place. Each now is, you might put it this way. Of course, in a way, each now is special now, or each now is special when it happens. But it's not happening all the time. So I don't know what it means to say there's an objective now. I don't really understand what people have in mind by that, any more than if people were to say, is there an objective here? I'd say, well, what do you mean an objective here? I mean, New York is no more objectively here than Israel is objectively here, right? what the word here picks out depends upon where that token is produced, and what the word now picks out depends upon when that token is produced. I think those are completely parallel linguistically. And I think, as I said, the past, future, and present are equally real. Maybe I'll make one last comment. At some point, Quine wanted to clear something up, so he introduced, by stipulation, a philosophical use of the word is, which means is, was, or will be. So, you know, by this usage, I would say, I don't know, the Crusades are, right? The Crusades exist, and, you know, the Biden presidency exists, and who knows, maybe humans on Mars exist, but that just means was, is, or will be. You kind of, you know, you just take away the usual connotation of the tense. And if you say that, then I would say, yeah, I mean, the future is, but that just means is, was, or will be. And in the case of the future, I mean, it will be. In the case of the past, I mean, it was. For space-like separated things, we don't have normal linguistic conventions because language didn't develop believing that there were space-like separated events.
May I go back again to our conversation in London when I mentioned this letter of Einstein to the son of his friend, Michele Besso. So he told him, my father is dead, and Einstein told him, you know, Michele has preceded me a little in leaving this world, but that doesn't matter. For us convinced physicists, the distinction between past, present, and future is arbitrary. And then you protested and said, Avshalom, this is just a personal letter written. I mean, come on.
Which it was.
You and I will never write such a condolence letter. You agree with me?
I might say all kinds of things to make somebody feel better that I personally don't believe. I mean, look, you're
so
trying
you
to
would tell an orphan,
you know, in a time of mourning, this is not when you're going to be expositing your deeply held views about the nature of physics.
But he chose to say, we are physicists, and your father is not really dead. I mean,
wouldn't that make him feel better?
Huh?
Wouldn't that make him feel better?
That's a personal question. I would rather ask Luis. I mean, if God forbid you lost a dear person, a dear one, and I will come to condole you, and I say, you know, Tim believes that the past, present, and future are equally real. So your dear one is not really dead. I mean, the living dear one of yours is in the past. What would you say, Luis?
Well, I think both of you have good points. On the one hand, a person is not likely to say something that contradicts their beliefs about science purely for the sake of making somebody feel better. On the other hand, it depends on the person. I can't imagine somebody saying, you know, I don't believe that X, but I will say that I believe it because it makes a person feel better. So I think
let's be a little bit realistic here. If this was the reason this note of condolence has been repeated over and over and over and over and over again,
my fault,
is because you won't find in Einstein's even popular presentations of relativity a similar claim. People repeat it because it's so striking. If you really believe that, it would have been in the forefront of his exposition of relativity.
I beg to differ. There are two sources. One was his conversation with Rudolf Carnap. And there he said that the fact that we have to give up the notion of the now is a matter of painful but inevitable resignation. That means that he struggled with it. He was not totally happy with it, but he said that this is a sacrifice that I have to make. And then there is this volume edited by Schilip, Einstein physicist philosopher.
Mm-hmm.
And in the last, I don't have it with me, in the last chapter, which is reply to my critics, he once again endorses his claim that time, that the passage of time is something that should be given up. So I think that Einstein was not completely happy with it, with this view of giving up the notion that there is some now moving a long time. But I understand, Tim, I understand that I have exhausted my my arguments when we are dealing with space-time from the classical or relativistic viewpoint. May I take you to our work in quantum mechanics, which
Yes,
some part is speculative. And there I will show, first of all, that retrocausality is a part and parcel of quantum mechanics. And actually, if you accept it, several mysteries in quantum mechanics, several oddities of quantum mechanics will become more natural. And then I'll present a very fresh work of ours from the last few years, which I think strain the notion of time and in some way forces us to think about it, again. Okay.
Can I just make a couple comments before you start? Because I think it'll, otherwise I'll have to make them afterwards.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
One of the issues we agree about is Newton believed that, as I said, now any instant, it doesn't matter that it's now or any instant, was global, right? That there's a one and the same instant of time over the entire universe. And certainly if you take relativity at face value, you give that up. You absolutely give it up. And one might, I'm not sure, I'd have to look at these other passages of Einstein. That might be something also he didn't feel all that comfortable about, but he did. So this is probably going to come up. The other point is, I hope you don't mean retrocausation is implicated in quantum mechanics in the sense that you can't do quantum mechanics without it, because you can do quantum mechanics without it. Maybe you mean a retrocausal theory looks better to you or has some advantages. But I think the word implication there, I'm sure you would agree, is too strong, because if I just put in a foliation and do, say, Bohmian mechanics, as I say, all the time solutions can just go forward, so you're not going to get any loops or anything going backward, and that'll give you all the right predictions, right? So I think what you're arguing must be a little weaker than what you said.
Yeah. So okay. I'll make it more measured. I'm not trying to modify quantum mechanics, not yet. One day, I think that you and I agree that one day we will have a better theory where all the discrepancies between quantum mechanics and relativity theory will be nicely resolved within a very beautiful logical framework, and there will be a revolution, and we are all expecting it, and so on and so on. Now, what I want to present is the following. I had the privilege of doing my PhD with Yakir Aharanov, just as Lev Weidman had, and we are very privileged that even today, at the age of 91, he is still very active, and we are publishing papers with him. And he proposed a new way of looking into quantum mechanics. Now, let me remind our viewers that quantum mechanics is unique among all branches of physics in that it is incomplete. That is, the theory, the formalism is beautiful and perfect and gives us all these amazing effects. But when you look around you, you don't see a quantum reality. So what's the difference between the quantum realm that works when you do experiments with single particles and the everyday reality where you have chairs and tables and cats? So there are several interpretations, all of them actually giving making the same predictions, because they are interpretations. They are not alternatives to quantum mechanics. So we have Bohmian mechanics, to which you adhere, I understand. Many worlds interpretation, which my colleague Lev Weidman adheres, and many others. Yakir Aharonov's formalism, the two-state vector formalism, has a very special status, I believe, among these interpretations, in the following sense. It is an interpretation. That is, it gives you the same predictions as quantum formalism, with a slight twist. The idea is that every quantum evolution you should compute twice, one going forward in time and then the other one going backwards in time. And then when you combine them, in some cases, you get more information about the quantum system than apparently allowed to you by quantum mechanics. Let me give you an example. If you make two measurements on a particle and you measure two non-commuting variables, say position and momentum, one at the morning and one at the evening, then the two-state vector formalism, which I will call TSVF henceforth, tells you that at noon, you know both values, position and momentum, at great precision, which is actually apparently impossible by the uncertainty principle, but this is in the past. So that was one thing which was interesting. And then it turned out that in some cases, this kind of computation yields some new physical values, which are very strange, too large, too small, sometimes negative, like negative mass. And then when you validate them by experiment, it turns out that they are perfectly in accordance with quantum mechanics. So this is another interpretation, but here is something very interesting. None of these effects, which were verified in laboratories, was ever discovered or predicted by any of the other interpretations. Bohmian mechanics, many worlds, Copenhagen, and so on and so on. It is only in retrospect that once they are validated in the laboratory, then it turns out that they are compatible with quantum formalism and then with all the other interpretations. For this, I argue, kind of chauvinistically, that there is something special to the TSVF. It's not just an interpretation, because if that is the formalism which has given us so many, and I'm going to show a few, so many beautiful predictions, surprising predictions, perhaps once we have a better theory than quantum mechanics, it will turn out that the TSVF was an important step towards that goal. I know that it sounds a bit, I don't know, arrogant, but this is what I want to defend. In your permission, I'll begin with a joke. What you see here is the Bering Sea on the presentation. And this, and I should tell you that the great Soviet encyclopedia during the 60s, the entry on Bering Sea was very, very lengthy, many, many pages. And the question is, why is it? Just a little, a small geographical entry. Why should the Bolshoya Sovietskaya Encyclopedia give it such a long discussion? It turns out that you have to go to earlier editions of that encyclopedia, and then you would find, so you would find, this guy, Lavrenti Beria, which was the head of the KGB or whatever, and he was the hero of the people. He murdered many people at the time of Stalin, and then came Khrushchev and got rid of him. Now, what do you do when all the volumes of the Soviet encyclopedia has such a large entry on Lavrenti Beria, the former hero of the people, that now you don't want people in the Soviet Union to know that he ever existed? It's a real story. So people, commissars from the from the Communist Party went to all houses in all of the Soviet Empire and said, give us the volume B of the Sovietskaya Encyclopedia. We shall return it to you later. Took out all the pages. Now they had a problem with the missing pages. It's all true. So they said, what's the next entry? Bering, let's make it more extended in order to cover it. So this is how history was rewritten. With this, I want to say that sometimes some oddities in quantum mechanics can be better explained if you accept the premise of the TSVF, of the two-state vector formalism, which says the following, and it perfectly matches what we know from time symmetry in classical physics and then also in quantum physics. This is an important paper known as ABL, which is by now classic, Aharanov, Bergman, Leibowitz. And it says the following: you make two measurements on a particle. At the state between the two measurements, the particle is affected by both measurements, the past one and the future one. We always naively think by the uncertainty principle that once you make a measurement, you affect the state of the particle from now on. It turns out that you affect the state of the particle also in previous moments until the previous measurement. So there is a time which was neglected until that paper. There is a time interval which is very interesting, where interesting things are happening and a kind of retrocausation is taking place. And I want to show a few examples. first of all, I take something which is known to you, and this is Schrödinger's cat. So Schrödinger's cat is a problem. You know, has the cat been in superposition in that sealed box during the time before you opened it, whether it was in a superposition or being dead and alive? And some years ago, a student of mine asked me a question which surprised me. And she said, why are you so much worried about that? You can find out whether it was superposed or dead or alive. Just make the experiment long enough. So between the little event at the beginning of the experiment and then the opening of the box, there are, say, 2 or 3 days. And then when you open the box, it's not that you will find only a dead cat or an alive cat. It's not only that, according to quantum mechanics, you are determining the state of the cat, but you will find if the cat is dead, it will be decomposed. If the cat is alive, it will be very thin and angry with you. So that means that you know that it has been dead or it has been alive during that time in which the box was sealed. And I thought about it, and then I realized that actually when you are opening the box, you're determining not only the state by your observation, by the measurement. You are not only determining the state of the cat, which was superposed, but its entire history until the time that you have begun the experiment when you sealed the cat in the box. So there is something retrocausal going on here. And then here is a paper by Aharanov, Maudlin, and myself with Eliyahu Cohen, and it goes like this. You have 2 atoms. One is excited and the other is ground on the upper left corner, number 1. So you have 2 atoms. They are in cavities. So the left one is excited. The one in the left hand cavity is excited. The one in the right hand cavity is ground. It is blue. And then you wait for a while until there is a possibility that they have exchanged a photon. So if they have exchanged the photon, so the one which has been excited will become ground, and the one which has become ground will be excited. So at the second picture, you can see that they are in a superposition. As long as you did not measure them, they're in a superposition of being either excited or ground. And then you wait for a while and you make a measurement on one of them. And it turns out that it is either excited or ground. Now here, there is a paradox. In order to make a Bell test experiment, you should take another value, say magnetic moment, which is conjugate to being excited or ground. So you have Alice and Bob, and you give them several pairs of atoms like that, which are in a superposition. They have either exchanged a photon or they have not exchanged a photon. And Alice and Bob, just like in all the experiments testing for Bell's inequality, they're measuring at random either the magnetic moment or the energy of the atom. And sometimes they find that it is excited or ground, or its magnetic moment is up or down. They compare their results and they are satisfied that Bell's inequality has been violated, and that is that there was something going on, they were entangled and there was something non-local going on between them. However, here's the problem. In some of the cases, Bob may choose, just because they are making a random choice, to measure the energy of his atom. And Alice, by chance, also measuring the energy of her atom. They can measure either the energy or the magnetic moment. And in half of the cases, they will find that the excited atom has remained excited and the ground atom has remained ground. So they have never exchanged a photon. So nothing went on there. We can show by using Bell's inequality that the very fact that Alice chose to measure the energy of the atom just has made Bob's atom to remain ground such that it appears that no photon was ever exchanged between them. Can you see that there is something paradoxical here, Tim?
Well, I see that you've stated the case in a way that sounds paradoxical, but I don't see that there is anything paradoxical, because I don't think that the fact, I mean, it sounds like you have a way of preparing an entangled state between these 2 atoms.
Mm-hmm.
and then you distribute them to Alice and Bob, and they're able to violate Bell's inequality, which we really shouldn't be surprised. The main thing is when you say, well, if Alice, who is given the one that was originally excited before the procedure that entangled them, later finds that hers is entangled, well, then no photon was ever exchanged or blah, blah, blah. That seems to me to be just an incorrect. This is sort of like what Wheeler does when he talks about finding out which way the particle went in the delayed choice experiment. What he does is he wheels in classical physics in a completely unprincipled and incorrect way to say, if I see the thing over here, it means it took this classical path. If I see it over here, it means it took that classical path. If I see the interference, then it means it took both paths. You want to say, no, I mean, what path it took, you can't wheel in classical physics to determine that. And I would say the fact that Alice, if she finds it's still in the excited state, does that show that nothing was ever exchanged? No. Why should it?
Because the only way they could be entangled is by Alice's atom sending a photon to Bob's atom, and it turns out that apparently no photon was ever sent. Alice's atom has remained excited. Bob's atom remains ground. So how could they be entangled?
They got entangled by the operation of the Hamiltonian in the usual way, by Schrodinger evolution. That'll happen every time.
So
Schrodinger
you can entangle
the same every time.
So you don't feel that, I think that on one thing we agree, that you can't talk here about the history of the two atoms in the way that we talk in classical physics.
Sure.
Very good.
Oh,
so
yes.
About this, we agree.
Yes, we agree about that, absolutely.
Okay.
This is quantum mechanics. I mean,
okay, very good.
You're violating Bell's inequality. You're not going to get a good classical explanation of this. It's not possible.
Okay, so I won't go more into this because you don't find it a paradox. We find that there is something strange here because actually you are asking the atom, are you entangled with the other atom? And the only way for it to be entangled is to exchange a photon. And apparently it looks like they have never exchanged a photon. And you say that it's not surprising. Fine. Now, let me say another thing about the TSVF, which is the two-state vector formalism. This is a device that is known to you. I mean, this is how we teach quantum mechanics. You have a source and the beam splitter and two detectors. And they have, because the beam splitter, it's a half-silvered mirror, then you have the equal probability of the right-hand detector to click or the left-hand detector to click. And then you wait for a while and the right-hand detector clicks. So this is one future. I mean, there were two futures of this experiment, two possible futures. You make the experiment and you find out that one of the two futures has happened and the other did not. So far, everything is fine.
I'm
two future outcomes
confused about how you're thinking about this. I mean, are you using a collapse? I mean, you say you're using the two-state vector formalism to make these calculations. Okay, that's fine.
I didn't do it yet. I'm going to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it sounds like you're kind of doing a retroactive collapse or
Not
something.
yet.
Very much what Wheeler does, which I don't think any coherent theory does.
Very good. Okay. But at present, I'm just presenting what everybody is thinking. I mean, here is the beginning of the experiment. None of the detectors clicked, and I know that they have an equal probability to click. So there are two future outcomes. One of them will materialize, the other will not, and then I will say this turns out to be the real future of this process. So this detector has clicked. So this is the real future. May I call the other one now, which is dotted, the fake future, the future that did not take place, or fake future outcome. So far, everything is fine. I mean, there have been two possible futures. One became real, and the other I'll call fake. Would that be okay?
Can I? All right, again, I'm just trying to keep track of this. So let me see. If I were analyzing this using a pilot wave theory, I would say every time you do the experiment, the wave function does exactly the same thing, and that involves both branches. Sometimes the particle goes one way, sometimes the particle goes the other way. That depends on its initial position. The fake future, what you've called the fake future here is the path the particle would have taken had it started out somewhere differently. That's fine. So I can understand all that, right? In each case I do it, it takes exactly one path and I get exactly one result. It's not a many worlds theory, right? Yeah.
Now, if we employ the method of the TSVF and we run it backwards, we compute it backwards. You can even think of doing of just time reversing the experiment. Then, in some cases, you will get back to your past, that is to the source. But you know, because there is a beam splitter, sometimes the particle will not be absorbed back in its source, but it will go to the other way. Simple quantum mechanics, right? It's a beam splitter. And it either returns to its source or in terms of Bell's Bohmian mechanics, the wave function now splits back if you compute it backwards.
But you're computing the wrong backward thing.
Why is
You
that?
should compute it the backward of the original wave function always splits. So there's a piece of it, as it were, at both detectors with phase relations.
Right.
And then if you just reverse it, this is the normal time reversibility of the Schrodinger equation. If you time reverse everything, you won't get that question mark thing. All of that will be knocked out by interference.
You're absolutely correct. Okay. But now I want to show you something, and this is what I've been thinking until a few years ago. But here is what I say. I mean, this is what the TSVF says. If you have a history where you have a fake future and a fake past, I mean, these dotted lines going to the future and to the past, they sometimes will overlap. You can make some experiments in which they overlap. So the blue and I mark them blue and red, blue for the future and red for the past. They will sometimes overlap. And in the places where they overlap, now this is in purple, you will have a real effect, a real particle emerging there. And I want to show such an experiment. It is due to Lev Weidman. And then we have proposed a real experiment of this kind, which was performed in Osaka University. It was published in Nature Scientific Reports. So here is a kind of Mach-Zehnder interferometer, which is a bit more complicated. This is the nested interferometer of our friend Lev Weidman. So there is a small interferometer here, okay? And now you have 3 detectors. This beam splitter is not half and half, but 1/3 and 2/3. So it's 1/3 transparent. And here is an ordinary Mach-Zehnder interferometer. So your photon or your particle may go to one of these 3 detectors, either D1 here if it goes to the right, and then it has to go to D1, or if it goes to the left, in 1/3 of the cases, it will go either to D2 or D3. So far, everything is fine. Just trust me that I'm very good. And now you run it. And it turns out that D1 does not click. So actually, you have killed this right-hand branch. The photon never went there. Okay, there is some time. There is some time difference between D2 and D1 and D2 and D3. So you know that it will end up either in D2 or D3. Okay, so you're sure that it never went to the right-hand side of this interferometer. Then you wait for a while, and it turns out that D3 doesn't click either. So it's D2, which is somewhat rare. This is what you got your click. So here is the history. The history is that on the right hand, you have this kind of fake future, which you're not very happy with it, but just as a figure of speech. And at the left hand, you have the real history, that is that the particle has bounced on the mirror, then it was reflected, went to the left side, and then bounced on the other beam splitter and went to D2. So far, everything is nice. Here says the TSVF, now compute it backwards. And when you compute it backwards, you get something which is really ridiculous. So these are the 2 fake futures. I apologize for this rude wording, but now let's run it backwards. And it is this detector which has clicked. What is the backwards history? Here you get 2 fake paths, right? It once again visits the right-hand part of the large interferometer, goes into the small interferometer, and then emerges to some place where there's not been any source. And the same when for the part that actually goes to the left, where you know that this is the real history, you will have again another fake past, which will never occur. And you're rightly saying that this happens because you did not time reverse the two other detectors.
Right.
But here is the claim that you have two histories here, one in blue and one in red, with their fake futures and fake pasts. And here is what the TSVF is saying. The TSVF is saying that as you see, they overlap. Let me show it once again. They overlap here within the small interferometer. The particle never went to the small interferometer on the right-hand side. It never returned from there. But when you put the two calculations together, you get this purple thing, which gives you a very strange result, that there is a real particle there. Real particle at the same time that there is a particle here. The particle never went there, never came back to the other detector, but the TSVF tells you that for a very brief time there is a real particle. How do you verify it? And here is a problem which a philosopher may love. TSVF tells you that interesting things are happening between two measurements. You make, say, one in the morning, one at the evening, so something very interesting happens at noon. In this case, when you have a very rare post-selection, then you have something very exotic. You have a surplus particle being on the right hand within the small interferometer where it should not have been. How do you validate it? That's a very interesting prediction, but how do you validate it? Well, here is how you don't validate it. You can't make a measurement because the TSVF is about what happens between measurements. So if you make a measurement, then it will be upon a measurement, and the TSVF would not hold. Yakir has invented the weak measurements, you know, that somehow do measure it, but do not interfere. And there is a lot of, they have not been universally accepted. People say that you are actually interfering and so on. Yakir and Aharanov and Weidman found a way in which, in some cases, you can make a projective measurement on this particle. You just send a test particle to the right-hand side to tell you whether it was there or not. And Eliyahu Cohen and myself, together with two Japanese physicists, actually we have proposed an experiment which was performed and in which a test particle was split, not only in space, but also in time. You can split a particle in time just by splitting it and then giving it some delay. So it visits your target 3 times because of the delays, of the 2 delays. And we have shown, this time with a projective measurement, that there was no particle on the path between the source and the small interferometer. Neither was a particle going back from it, but for a brief time, there was a real particle which has just reflected the test particle for the brief time that it was there. I don't think that Yakir will agree with me if I say that that it is revolutionary, this kind of experiment. But I find that this is a challenge to all existing interpretations, Bohmian mechanics, many worlds interpretation, in explaining what is happening here, which is a surprise. Now, when you calculate it, it turns out to be in perfect agreement with quantum formalism. However, it has not been predicted by by any of the other interpretations. So I've talked enough. I would like to hear your opinion about this. What I'm saying here is that the TSVF tells you that in quantum mechanics, there is a profoundly new way that you think about time. Now, it's much more radical than relativity theory. You should think about any quantum interaction as if it is the result of 2 wave functions. One going the ordinary way from the source to the detector, from past to the future, and the other doing the other way around. So far, many people like this interpretation because it was Kramer's transactional interpretation, which I think is beautiful, and which says that in cases like the EPR, you wonder how come that Alice making a measurement here and Bob making a measurement here, then think about it going back to the past and then back to the past and then coming to the present. But here, Tim, And this is a place where I would love a philosopher to comment on it. And actually, if you want to think about it, and that we will convene again, because I value very much your opinion. How about me sending you the papers? There is a very lucid one, which is very visual, and then also a technical one. How about me sending you the papers and having your comment about it? Because do you agree that it pertains to the nature of time?
Let me see. I guess what I would say is a couple things, which I don't think you're going to disagree with. You were emphasizing that the reason for taking this as evidence in favor of something like a certain interpretation of the two-vector formalism seriously was because it was thinking in those terms that this phenomenon was first discovered, even though, as you say, now I understand all the thing about changing history, even though once it's discovered, other ways, other theories can show that they would make the same predictions, right? You're not disputing that. I mean, the first thing I would say is that's kind of an interesting methodological principle. Of course, if I use that principle for the discovery of Bell's inequality and the discovery of non-locality, I'm going to say, well, he was thinking about Bohmian mechanics. He was thinking about Bohm's 1952 paper. He got there before anybody else. This is reason for, so there's a tu quoque here that, one shouldn't.
Never thought about it. Never thought about it. I'm impressed.
So by that same principle, I can turn that around and say, and furthermore, in that theory, as I said at the beginning, everything just proceeds forward in time. There's no backward anything. You just solve the Schrodinger equation forward in time. You solve the guidance equation forward in time. Nothing ever goes backward. So you don't, this can't be a demonstration of anything going backward or any, any price-like thing. Now, let me say another couple words and then I'll stop. Of course, in the case of a single particle, one can visualize its wave function as on physical space or physical space-time because it's just a single particle. And one can ask, where does the wave function go? And you're going to get the diagrams you were showing, right? On every repetition of the experiment for a no-collapse theory, it'll go along all those paths and you'll get interference and everything, right? So there'll be something there. On a Bohmian theory, the actual particle will only go along one path and it'll never show up on that mirage thing.
So here is the surprise. I mean, what we proposed is to take a test particle. The test particle, you can split it. So it can go both to the right and to the left. And then the part that goes to the right goes there 3 times. As I said, you can split a particle also in time. Shouldn't be a problem, right? You split it in space, and then you give it some delay by some phase, and then it goes at T1, at T2, at T3. At T1, it went to the path before the small interferometer. At T2, it went, that part of the test particle went to the upper path, where on the upper part of the small interferometer. In the middle, it went inside the interferometer. What do you know? It indicated that there was no particle. I mean, it went through. There was no particle before at T1. There was no particle at T2, but there was a real particle which reflected the test particle back at T2 in the middle. So my challenge is this. My challenge is this. Can you? Nobody did that so far. Mm-hmm. Can you analyze it in terms of Bohmian mechanics and then show that according to Bohm's to Bohmian mechanics, such a delicate kind of measurement, and I stress it's not a weak measurement, because I know people sometimes say we have enough with weak measurements, there is a lot of noise. This is a projective measurement. Would you like to show that in retrospect, and I really love your touche about Bell working within the Bohmian mechanics. But would you like to show that in terms of Bohmian mechanics, this is natural, that actually a test particle will reveal there has been a real particle at both sides for a brief time. It has been there all the time at the left path. But for a brief time, it existed also within the small interferometer.
I mean, yeah, so this I would really need to very carefully read the papers and maybe consult with better experts than me to understand how the thing would work out. And so I don't want to, I mean, it's an interesting challenge, and I'm glad, as you say, I'm not certainly off the top of my head, I have nothing intelligent to say about it. I will say one more thing that concerns me, which is, of course, when you were talking about how this two-state, how you're understanding the significance of the two-state formalism, because there are ways of understanding it in terms of just post-selection and Bayesian updating and so on, which don't involve retrocausation. You did say, well, there are funny things that can happen between measurements, and many of us for many years have wanted to get the word measurement out of all these discussions, right? We get very upset when anybody says, well, it really is important to understand which events were the measurements and which were the between measurements, because for the reasons Bell gives in Against Measurement, we don't feel like we understand there's a sharp division between a measurement and a non-measurement event. So I'm a little concerned that the way you exposited the theory seems to be making non-trivial use of the term measurement, and so that's just a different reason for feeling uncomfortable about it.
That's fine.
But how this would be dealt with in other ways of understanding, I'm certainly not prepared to say anything off the top of my head.
So I would love to see, yeah. Just let me ask you, being curious, I'm thinking about the IFM, the interaction-free measurements. So if the detector or the bomb did not explode, you wouldn't say that actually the silence, because this is what I've been thinking for the last 30 years, because I'm not in the many worlds interpretation. I was always thinking that the silence of the detector or the silence of the bomb at that moment has made a real change there. And I think that Bohm would also agree about that. He would say that there's been an empty wave going this way. The wave has been split into two, one going to the bomb and the other with the particle going to the other way. But the moment that the bomb did not explode or the detector remained silent, it has somehow affected the other path.
I wouldn't say that at all. I would say it's all Schrödinger evolution.
Okay. So the challenge for you is greater, and I would extremely appreciate. I would ask our host to conclude this meeting. Let's take time, because I value your opinion very much. I'll send you the papers, and we shall reconvene and have your analysis of this. Do you agree that this is a challenge?
No, I think of course it's a very interesting. I mean, I've heard Lev talk about the nested interferometers a bit. My understanding is that Lev, I guess you also think he doesn't quite agree with the way you're putting on.
Oh, yeah, there's many words and so on.
And I've never, so I've seen similar examples and thought a bit about them, but never worked them through in the kind of detail that would be necessary to deal with, especially this additional projective measurement you're putting in. So yeah, I mean, of course, always you learn something when you work through a puzzle case like this. You always learn something. So I'm very, very happy to do that, and I'm certainly not prepared to, I don't want to mess it up. I'll probably consult with Shelley and consult with some people who can better.
Yeah, and give him my best regards.
Yeah.
Wow, wonderful. So yeah, I mean, there is something very interesting here. It may not bear directly on the issue of time. Actually, it may, because
But this is what shocks me, is that I thought you were a big fan of time passing, but all these retrocausal things are things based in the idea there's no fundamental direction of time, which means talking about time passing doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That's what I've always objected to myself. That's why I'm no fan of retrocausation at all, because I think time is a direction, and I think causes precede their effects. So it's a bit of a shock to me that in the second part of this, you seem to be adopting a view that really there's not even a fundamental direction of time. Then I don't understand how you understand becoming. I understand becoming because there is a direction of time. and things become, right? But if there's no fundamental direction, I don't even know what becoming means, as opposed to unbecoming or something like that.
I confess that you caught me, I mean, I'm aware of it in some contradiction. I learned sometimes, you know, if your work leads you to two different ways, don't suppress one in favor of the other. This is very beautiful, and it came on our work. The question is, and this we can do next time. Yeah, I'd love to do. I can show that becoming becomes somewhat richer when you bring retrocausation in it. Let me give you a hint. Becoming goes only forward at the macroscopic realm, but at the microscopic realm, it may do such zigzags and going back to the past and coming back. You may find it a little bit cumbersome, because you may say either you block universe and then you can allow retrocausations, or you believe in becoming and things only going forward. And you may be right. I confess that, I mean, I love this result. You know that Nature Scientific Reports has held the paper for 8 months, because my guess is that they sent it to a few referees who said, I don't believe it, but I don't find any, I can't find what's wrong with it. So give it to somebody else. But now there is an experiment, and I'll send it to you. So thank you for this comment. I mean, you embarrassed me, you caught me unprepared twice. Once by showing me that Tukok, you know, that what I'm saying about the TSVF, people can say, and I didn't have the privilege of meeting John Bell. Did you, have you?
Yes, several times. Yes,
wow,
wonderful man. Really, really wonderful man.
So he was a great man. So yeah, he was a very devout Bohemian. So
well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, he gave a, you know, wrote this very nice paper on GRW and appreciated what they were doing, right?
Yeah, it was still in his time.
Yeah, he wrote the paper, Are There Quantum Jumps? I heard him give that paper in Arice. I heard him give it, I think, the first time he gave it.
Okay. So you see, Bell was also, he didn't think that he should always be consistent and suppress one idea because he has another.
He thought these were all interesting ideas. They all ought to be, you know, they all ought to be pursued. He was happy about both of those because they got rid of the measurement problem, because they don't mention measurement in the fundamental axioms. And he saw a way that maybe the collapse theory could be made relativistically invariant. That's what he talks about in the Are There Quantum Jumps paper. So he certainly thought they should all be pursued and all developed. And I would say the same thing. I'm not trying to suppress anything.
Good. Good.
Well, excellent. Allow me to butt in here very quickly and ask if we could comment for a second about this concept of interpretation. It seems to me that science is subject to interpretation. Viewers of the channel will know that I frequently invoke Feynman in his famous lectures. I think at Cornell, talks about exactly what we've been talking about here, that a good scientist holds as many possible theories or models or perspectives in his or her brain as possible, because that person never knows where the next breakthrough will come through. So if we take a step back, I'm a big proponent of the two-state vector formalism. And I think if we take a step back and say, what is the ultimate goal of science? Do we agree that if the many worlds, or if the two-state vector formalism or Bohmian mechanics leads to important results in other areas of science, then that interpretation necessarily is preferable to an interpretation that does not lead us to other breakthroughs in other branches of science? Does that make sense? Can you comment on this?
Can I say a word again about, I understood what Avshalom was saying. I myself don't like the word interpretation. I think they're just different theories. I think Bohmian mechanics is just a different theory, certainly than many worlds. It's a different theory than GRW. The different versions of GRW are different from each other. They're just different theories. It could turn out that two different theories have all the same empirical consequences. So you can't even theoretically imagine an experiment that would decide between them. Although
Yeah,
that's very difficult to establish because you have to think, what are all the possible experiments? I mean, it'd be very hard to even understand exactly how you could prove such a result. If you could prove that, then to me, that would just say, well, maybe one of these two is correct. If one is correct, the other's incorrect, and maybe we'll never know. We just won't have enough information. From that point of view, I don't like calling these things interpretations, certainly not of quantum mechanics. I mean, I think what's in the books as quantum mechanics is a collapse theory. It actually has collapse of the wave function. I mean, that's what's in von Neumann very explicitly. And that makes different predictions for a Wigner-Friend kind of case, because the friend would do what everyone would call a measurement that would collapse the wave function, that would kill off some interference terms. In a many worlds thing, you don't kill off the interference terms. In a Bohmian thing, you don't kill off because it's all Schrodinger evolution. So those actually in principle make different predictions, right? No, I don't think anybody can think those are empirically equivalent. Even if we can't do the experiments, in principle, they make different predictions. Certainly where the experiments can't decide, things like fecundity and simplicity and conceptual clarity and other considerations are going to come into thinking which of these seems to be the most plausible. But probably that's a very open-ended list and probably is variable from when you're comparing, it depends on which pair of theories you're comparing and so on. That's the way I would think about it. Certainly, if one way of thinking about it easily led to interesting results that the other ways made obscure or hard to find, I would take that into consideration, try and understand why that's true.
Sure. Well, I just think that Avshalom's point about the two-state vector formalism leading to results that have previously been unattainable through other methods seems very valid. And I'll make an analogy to kind of get my point across. If we have a group of people that are in a very dangerous situation and they need to get out of a room, let's say, otherwise they will perish. And that room has a lock, and there's a password behind that lock. And so there's different clues about how to get that password, how to get out of that room. And so every person is free to make their theories about how to get the right password. And one of them comes up with a theory and produces the password and gets out of that room. I think ultimately, if we take a pragmatic approach to things, right, then whatever interpretation leads us to those important results in the other sciences, and Avshalom is part of a larger research group that we're looking into the implications of the two-state vector formalism for, very real empirical breakthroughs that are being made in biology by Michael Levin at Tufts and Harvard, in neuroscience by Carl Friston and Miller at MIT. And then now we're actually using the same mathematical approach or conceptual approach to make real breakthroughs in political theory and democratic theory. And sure, ultimately you will ultimately be able to explain this through the Schrodinger forward evolving Schrodinger wave equation, but it isn't the framework that has led us to these breakthroughs. So I just want to throw that out there, leave it in. Go ahead.
Let me push back a little. I mean,
go ahead.
There's the formalism. There's this thing called the two-state vector formalism.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a kind of physical understanding of it involving, as it were, both forward and backward propagation of two wave functions. This one I don't understand. I don't even understand what propagation backward in time. I mean, because I think time is a direction. I find that all very. There are, as far as I understand, ways of understanding that formalism, as I say, in terms of post-selection and Bayesian updating. And all of that, right? Bayesian statistics is well understood. There's no mystery about how to use, Bayesian updating to retrodict, right? You just take account of new information, maybe information you only got after the event, you conditionalize on it in the normal way, that's going to change, your retrodictions because you now have more information. None of that involves retrocausation, right? That's just plain vanilla epistemology using Bayesian statistics. Insofar as that can be used, that's a way of understanding a two-state formalism, the success of it won't imply anything about retrocausation.
Okay. Well, it seems to me that maybe I'm wrong here, but it seems to me that we're kind of sort of playing with words then, because ultimately, if in fact the two-state vector formalism is equivalent to a Bayesian approach, then it's simply using two sets of words and even mathematical formalisms to describe the same underlying reality of nature.
Which reality is it? I mean, in the Bayesian one, you have nothing going back in time.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. There's nothing like retrocausation in the Bayesian approach. So when you say they're describing the same one, which one are they describing? The one with nothing going backward in time?
What I think we can agree about is, I mean, we all know that quantum mechanics is not the last word on nature, on the laws of nature. Neither is special and general relativity. So what is it? None of the interpretations. You say that there are theories. I mean, I would understand that GRW is a theory because it makes a prediction which is distinct from, in a few cases, differs from that of the formalism. So I applaud to the courage to offer an alternative. With the others, we are not that happy because, there is no way to proceed. But there was one thing which Wheeler said, and I'm although I like his delayed choice, I am I think just like you, I don't like the Copenhagen interpretation, and he was a very staunch Copenhagenist. But once he said something which is very beautiful, and it goes as follows. I'm sure that you know this this passage. One day, we will find somebody will come with a new theory which will explain all of this, and then we will say, how beautiful, how simple, how come we didn't think about it all along? Do you know this passage?
I'm not sure I remember it in specific. I certainly hope that'll happen as well.
No, but you agree that once we see it, a very revolutionary theory which smoothly will solve everything, just like Einstein's special relativity brought Galilean invariance and Maxwell's equations into one natural framework, beautiful, with some painful sacrifice. But then everything was just there, everything in its place. Do you think that we can hope for such a thing to happen in present-day physics?
I have a very strong belief that at base, fundamental natural law is pretty simple. And you don't have to be Ed Witten to understand the math of it or anything. I mean, I do. I mean, I have to admit it's an article of faith.
It has worked so far. Nature proved to be simple.
Yeah.
Okay, with that, I suppose if you'll allow me to close with a final comment for viewers and for ourselves as well. I have been arguing for some time, since my first conversation with Tim, that these kinds of conversations at the foundations of physics, the kinds of breakthroughs that Yakir Aharanov had the courage to be stubborn about early in his career, these are fundamentally important in my view, not simply as philosophy. There's a practical, very real, pragmatist series of consequences to these things. And that's why I've been adamant that the value that the John Bell Institute could offer to a host country or city is, I think, priceless. I think these conversations are really, really critical. And I'm just very grateful to have been able to listen to you both today. And I'll end with a final thank you very much again for your time.
And we are meeting again, say in 2 weeks, something like that. I'll send him
okay. Yeah.
I'll send him the papers, and then we shall reconvene.
Yeah.
Sounds great.